Just starting. Perfect timing.
Ah,
We were checking in on everyone to see how everyone was doing, and
nice to see everyone.
great having you on. Okay, so I will kick off and I'll go through some of the slides as always, because I like if you're visual like myself, it's nice to be able to have slides and any follow-up. If you'd like the slides, let me know. I'm always happy to share those. Okay, so I will kick off with our session. Welcome, welcome. Most of us have been to these sessions before, so normal kind of setting in the sense that we will, please ask questions. If raise your hand, unmute. If I miss that, let me know. It is occasionally I do miss them. When people have put a question in, always happy to answer those. So, for those people watching this, perhaps you haven't joined us, these are the Leaderize bi-weekly sessions, happen every other Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. UK time. And what we're going to be discussing today's match, don't default, and which AI models for which job and how hard to make it think, right? Now, you know, most of us pick models out of habit. Most of us here will be saying, actually, I know I've been guilty of that. You can raise your hand saying, yes, I get that. It by default, less friction. We often go to the model that by default, it's there. It's the first it pops up and you start using it. And I'll say a little bit more about this. And often it's the one, so as we go into building and having agents, etc., and looking at orchestrating and looking at the model that best serves, we often end up having the one that we are paying more for. So initially, when we're experimenting, we may not notice, but when we are looking at one, we're looking at are we using the best model for the outcome we want? And sometimes we go, right, we'll get the kind of the most expensive model. And I'll say more about what I'm referring to here. And not think about cost. But when we are thinking about cost, we need to be thinking about are we actually using the right model for the job we want it to do? So the leaders who get the most out of AI aren't using a secret model. They're matching the model to the job, setting how hard it thinks on purpose, and they know the same logic works, whichever lab or whichever tool they use. Now, and you will have noticed with various models, you have seen perhaps that they work well, and suddenly we're not getting the quality output. Most of us will have experienced that at some point, right? So you're doing the same thing. You've got a clean structure you built in, but you're getting the outputs that don't quite match. Um, so to be honest, did you choose it for the job? Do you think through kind of what my task is at hand, which model to use, or do we by default just go to the model and just try to get the output because it's quick and we want a quick response, right? Most of us would probably fall into that category. I know I have. I'm just like, I just want a quick response. Right? I'm not thinking through really necessarily which model, I just want it to do the thing. And but more we look at streamlining our workflow, it's a good idea to kind of consider that. So, or does it become a default thing? I'm just going to see who's saying I choose a model that tells me I'm brilliant. We do have the sycophancy, right? It's like, okay, I want it to tell me I'm brilliant. Yeah. So, we are training. I mean, we're I know that that's a joke for sure. And I suppose I'll be a little bit clear when I say the models. I'm referring here to the actual models that exist within the AI tool. You're right, like some of them are going to be agreeing with us, right? Others, if you're anything like me, my AI just doesn't give me the response, especially in the GPT environment. It no longer gives me the response I want. What it tends to do, it pushes back. It tends to push back all the time now. I'm like, oh, so I've got to think through, like, I've got to go back now and think, okay, I was getting it to push back, which is great. Sometimes I do want it to be quick, right? So, and it doesn't agree with me. Actually, it does the opposite. So, I just wanted to say that. So we're going to have a few people who will have. I've just jumped out of the slide, so my apologies. Okay. Let me get back into my slide. Hopefully you can see this. And let me just double check the question that came through. Should be most models, but be brutally honest. Yes, yeah. So, in terms of there are three tiers, and these and they're more. If we think about even Claude or whichever model we're using. We've noticed for those of you who use Claude that we saw Fable is no longer there. It doesn't even appear now in the Claude environment, so it seems to have just kind of disappeared. We have the way we want to be thinking about this, and actually, I've been prompted to think more about this working with my mentor. And it's almost like I was thinking, well, I'm going to use Opus 4.8 because I know it's going to do the most critical it's going to be doing the reasoning. It's going to, it works at kind of high strategic thinking, and why not have the best? But I discovered that's not always the case. And in fact, and I'll go through this a little bit more in today's session here, because I'm not really optimizing what the tool is used for. So or the model is being kind of or is best used for, should be used for. So when we think of Opus, we're thinking of more the grand sort of strategic thinking, thinking through critical piece, things that we would put our name on. Perhaps we're thinking of branding, we're thinking of perhaps even creating a skill. We'd want to be using this model. If you try to create a skill in Sonnet 4.6, I just don't feel it does the same personally. But the thing is, once we've done that, we've done the high reasoning. Remember, high reasoning, it needs to go through the thinking. There's much more needed in that sort of work. So I always think of it like I'm getting a senior analyst, right? So if I think of like the hierarchy in a working organization, I might be thinking of an individual who I would be paying for that type of insight. So when we're thinking of, so these are the flagship, the kind of workhorse, I'm thinking of Sonnet 4.6. So when we're thinking of everyday writing, internal docs, drafts, it doesn't need the high reasoning that we would want from a model such as 4.8. And by the way, so if anyone is using any of the other models, I will be sharing that with you also. The fast haiku, it's quick, low in latency, so we get quicker responses, high volume. So once we're looking at, and the reason we're doing this is because as we're automating, we're building much more structures. That's the direction we want to be moving towards. And we want to have a better understanding how they perform and what they are able to do. Okay, so a quick check is your choice informed by practice? So more we start actually gearing and moving that direction, the better it will be. Choosing it because you've tested it on this type of work. Good strategy, good thing to be building in, or staying loyal to the one you know, right? Often we get pulled, and this is very much happens, we've got a few coaches in this space. We know we tend to kind of go to something because we become familiar. I mean, it's just a human thing. It's easy to do. We just continue staying with a model. I remember speaking to a few us in this group, we're talking about moving from OpenAI's GPTs and then maybe moving on to Claude. There was a little bit like, oh, I've been using it, I've built there. We're sort of drawn to this familiarity. And so we want to be continuously thinking about testing it to check. And there are models that do better. And we'll say a little bit more as we work through this. Loyalty is comfortable. Matching is what pays, right? So this is where we think carefully through. Sticking with one model, it's easy. It's also why either we overspend on simple work. So it's a bit like hiring an intern and just paying them your kind of, paying them more for, perhaps a CEO salary and going, oh yes, absolutely. This is what I'm going to pay you for. But actually, if we start thinking in that way and think, actually, what's the model? What are we using it for? It shifts us thinking, and it allows us to automate and keep our costs down. And I was prompted actually to put this session together because I could see previously we talked about MCP connectors, and I could see that people were exhausting their tokens, right? I could see that was happening, and I've and that was the issue that was coming up, and hence that prompted me to kind of move in this direction, and from recent conversations. So the shift is stop asking what do I usually use and start asking rather what does this job need? So think of it in that way. And for some of you, you may already be doing that. Quick check. Do you notice a difference in effort? So we're going to be talking about the effort component here. And this was really brought to surface through my conversation with Lou Dallo, my mentor. When you turn up the thinking or effort on a model like Opus 4.8, do you notice a difference in the output, right? What do you think more effort actually does, right? So if you're thinking, what does more effort, what does it do? You can imagine it takes more iterations. So more iterations mean it's going to need kind of more thinking. More thinking means it's going to cost us more, right? So it's going to use more tokens. So effort is depth, not brains, right? More effort makes the model explore further before it settles. So if we're wanting that deep thinking and deep kind of insight, we're going to need more passes, more checking, more tokens. It does not raise the model's reasoning power, right? You cannot turn up the effort on a weaker model to match a stronger one. Now, there's been conversations online. If I then try to, especially when Fable a few days ago, where it was suddenly not in, not available, and people had put, sort of stream, they'd stream their work, and they thought, well, why don't we prompt it and then try to prompt the cheaper versions to kind of get the output. Now, and we can test this out ourselves. You cannot turn up the effort on a weaker model if it just doesn't have that same capability. The ones that stronger models do, like the GPT's 5.5. This was passed down from my mentor. I actually saw this tested live. We go through about 2-3 hours of working together. And we're also looking at high low, where we're going actually went quite granular with its outputs. So the effort ladder, low, medium, high by default, X high, and max. So if you're starting to see that, start thinking, and we can go into this a little bit more if people have got questions, but if you're noticing that you're then thinking you can get it on a cheaper model and not pay for it, so you want, and it's not gonna get the same, you're not going to get the same output. More effort can cost less, not more. This is interesting. So it's counterintuitive, but not on heavier work, more effort up front. So I would, everybody here, if we can do the work up front and use the more kind of capable model like the Opus 4.8, And then we can shift it across to our skill. Like we can even train the AI to actually, we can train the AI, like we can train them to agree with us. We can train the AI to really pull on the the model based on the role or the task we want at hand, right? So it can come out cheaper and not dearer, right? The trap, turning up effort on a cheaper model to save money on hard job, but by the time it loops enough to get there, it can cost as much as the flagship or even more. So we're thinking, right, we'll put it, churn it through, and in the end, we're using up more tokens, but because it's going to have to do more iterations, and if you've gone through, like you've left it for a few hours or even overnight, you found that it's actually utilized and consumed your tokens, right? So just to be kind of mindful when you're thinking through kind of the tools. So quick check, how do you get the best output? When the work really matters, what do you actually do, right? So this is high level thinking. We're putting the hat on, we're thinking through, okay, switch models. Do we turn up the effort? Do we rewrite the prompt? Or do we do all three? Right. So I'm going to just go through some of these. The rule highest model that counts is sensible effort, simple, repeatable method. The things that count, highest model you can at medium to high effort. Everyday work would be a Sonnet capable and around 60% of the cost. Don't over tune a cheaper model to fake the flagship. This has been the conversations actually online. It really pays off because it's like, oh, I can get it to do the thing that Fable, like we can get the cheaper versions to do it. And suddenly you found that, and this has been the conversations being had. Now, if people have noticed anything different here, then we can obviously discuss that. So your trigger to step up the best model is think about deadlines, audience, and whose name is on it, right? So when we're thinking of credibility, who we're speaking to, or what our timeline is. Byline, your face, money, or reputation on it. So if I'm thinking of creating something that I know that, it really does mean that I need to have a reputable, piece of work, we're all kind of having things that we're creating or putting together, then even at low effort, it beats the sonnets, right? So functional, internal, good enough, Sonnet is plenty. So if we're doing lots of good enough, then use Sonnet. But if you're thinking of something that you're going to put your name to it, so you might do this initially for other things that you want to have, like send forward, then you may be able to, stick to the cheaper, the Sonnet. The same three tiers show up in other AI sort of posit labs, so flagships. So when we're thinking of Opus 4.8 or GPT 5.5, Gemini, and most of you perhaps are using different models here than you AI tools. I mean, you may not necessarily be just using Claude. And with some of the things that are coming up, I think there was something that came up just today. Uh, um, that happened with Claude. So there was a concern with privacy that came up. So we also want to be mindful of which tools and not be too attached to one. That's what I would say. Claude Sonnet. So the fast versions, the mini 5.5, Gemini Flash, and the fast. Um, I very rarely, and we may find, and some of you are using this, I don't use haiku. Perhaps some of you are using it. Um, and this is by default. It might be that, my brain kind of goes to the top three or, like top two, and not so much to haiku because it's the quickest. It's quick, and it's response for very simple, like maybe I'm just asking about a definition or something, right? Um, so each has the same effort dial, so the method travels across. The decision would be to the decision lens, right? The hat to wear. Draft an internal note, summary, sonnet, right? It's capable and it's 60% of the cost, right? Produce something with your name on it, of course, flagship 4.8, or 7 churn through simple high volume tasks. And this is where I need to kind of be thinking more about haiku myself, fastest and cheapest. Think hard about strategy or decision. So again, we're looking at the medium, high effort, depth is what we pay for. So some of the points, just in terms of costing. Now, I haven't seen, or it doesn't mean it's not out there, that how do we find out how much we're spending, like how much is being consumed? It's really difficult to gauge that. And I think the only way we know that, okay, somebody's put something in the chat, is this is the one from perhaps Claude of Anthropic. We've seen some indication, but it's hard to kind of check, right? And until we kind of experiencing that it's using more, right? So there's some indication, but I don't think it's clearly stated as of yet. So we've got the flagships from the most kind of the ones that most of us are familiar with. We've also got DeepSeek there. Pick by your job, not by the leaderboard necessarily. Now you might argue that, right? So I have got leaderboard examples. The top models are now a tight cluster, so they've become really powerful. So the rankings disagree and reshuffle monthly. There's a lot of movement happening. So event to benchmark charts and marketing. Remember, that's a good point, right? They are about marketing. Independent leaderboards show smaller gaps, right? These are the independent ones. I don't know if you've noticed that. Chasing the best model is a treadmill. So it's a trap we fall into. So matching the model to the job is the approach that I would say. Please kind of consider. Choose the tier that the work needs. Let the AI you know leaderboards kind of fight over that. Let us kind of make sure that we are considering what's working for us. More effort isn't more truth. Turning effort up makes the model think longer. It doesn't make it more honest. A longer chain of reasoning can go wrong in a more elaborate, more convincing way. So on any high stakes, high effort run, add a 10-second check. Show me the evidence you relied on and rate your confidence. So it could be a way of checking. One thing to try this week, pick one task you do regularly, weekly update, a client note, piece of analysis, decide on purpose. What's the purpose? Which tier and how much effort? Then run it in a way for a week and check. Notice what changes in the quality and what it costs you when you kind of go through this. So just I'm going to pull out some questions and I'm going to show you a couple of things also just in terms of questions for yourselves. What have you noticed your end in terms of noticing the difference? I mean, you may not as of yet be using kind of agents, but what's been your opinion? And feel free to, I know a couple of people have shared in the chat. Oh yeah, AP.
It's
Yeah.
mostly a
Okay.
monologue by me. Um, yeah, it's interesting. This is really super information because, and it's interesting that OpenAI. Oh, I'm sorry, Suba. I may have cut you off by jumping in. So let me shut up and you go first.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you, Richard. One, my question is, before we settle on setup at Claude, when we are run the same prompt at two different settings, like for example, we can say Sonnet 4.6 or 4.8 using the same prompt at high effort, and versus using with the same prompt to the Opus at high level. And when we check the compare the outputs, like sometimes the using with the same prompt it will say like option A and option B. We have to choose it the best result depends upon the accuracy. So that is how they tell us the faster than guessing. So how we can guess it?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do we know? which one, right? So
Yeah.
when you're testing it out, how do we know which one? So what I would do is I would get them to compete almost, right? And see what
Mhm.
the output, because at the end of the day, you're the expert in your field, right? So you're going to know whether it's giving you things as and the reasoning, the thinking that's gone on, and the level of like thinking, right? It's not just giving you something as a just because that's what it's trained for. Any model
Yeah.
is going to give you some output, right? And
Yeah.
so if we think about the job, that's going to be critical. So the way I've noticed is that by default, so if it's gone into Sonnet and I'm looking at creating a skill, something that, some of you have actually worked or working with me on, then if you're doing that, then I've noticed if I do the upfront thinking initially in Opus, I've done all the work there. And then if and my skills created using the kind of high level thinking, I just know I get a better quality output. That's been my experience. That's what it's been. It'd
Okay.
be great to hear what others are saying. But we could test this out. It's a good
Mhm.
test case scenario. It's an experiment, right? I always
Yeah.
say
Well,
test it for yourself and see, and then because you're looking at supporting clients in automation, and then
Yeah.
they're going to be asking you those questions, am I going to, which model or which model would you suggest? Because then,
yeah,
like, well, based on, you've done the high level thinking, now we can go to the cheaper version. You want to, those conversations help.
Yes, mostly we should actually care about the accuracy, depth, tone, and the speed. I think so, isn't it? Of
Yeah,
depending upon the
absolutely.
model.
Yeah, and once you've got it, you can hand it over, right? So
Mm.
within Claude, you've also got / handover. You can hand over, there's handover skills, I believe. I built one in, but I'll double check within sort of Claude environment. So there's some
Yeah.
shortcuts, right, to handing over work. So, when we have so much of a long chat and the thread and, you know, my mentor describes it as that horseshoe, where you start with kind of the high, and you've got your brief and you've gone through kind of the project, the kind of, in-depth thinking up front.
Mhm.
And there's the middle bit where there's a dip. Well, that's where
Yeah.
it weakens, and then you get the output. Well, the bit in the middle, we may sometimes be like that, it gets lost. So before it gets lost, we want to hand it over because we dilute the
right.
kind of research that's happening in these models. If that's been the case for yourself, then it's like, I don't know what I've been doing. You can come back after a day and it's like, what's happened here? So,
Mhm.
that's been my experience. So you might find that horseshoe kind of view, that, that upfront thinking, then you can hand it over. Do the handover is kind of an interesting component part to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I found was, to your point, you know, Claude has many different models. And I think one of the things you were just alluding to is that the context window varies model to model. Like Opus 4.8 has a million token context window, but Sonnet only has 250K. So if you are doing a lot of work in Sonnet, to your point, you're going to get to a point where you'll notice it because the degradation can sometimes be significant. It forgets to do stuff. It forgets to even read the instructions or the memory when you're in a session. So ultimately, what you end up having to do is prepare a transition document to continue that chat in a new chat and then just pick up where you left off. So you really have to be mindful of that. That's why a lot of people opt to use Opus. To your point, Valley, if you're going through a rather deep, contextual, complicated scenario, like creating a, a skill that uses multiple agents, and then you're running it through various iterations. Doing that at Opus will make sure that you have that level of capability and consistency in the process. Whereas to your point, if you did it in Sonnet, halfway through it could start degrading and hallucinating and forgetting stuff and diminishing the quality of its output. So you have to be very mindful of that. It's also interesting that a while back, ChatGPT decided to merge all of its, at one time, ChatGPT, if you recall, had many different flavors and variations as well. They merged that because behind the scenes, what they now do is based on your prompt or the use case that you're creating, or if you're creating a skill or an automation or whatever, or project, it will dynamically determine what model it will use um, to try to either economize on its side of the equation or fit the task. Now, because it's a black box, do we really know that the ChatGPT model that's chosen is really in our best interests? Because we all know that these large language models are designed to try to choke back on token use. Because let's face it, in the subscription model, OpenAI loses 22 cents on every dollar in its subscription model. So it has to find ways to economize. And sometimes that's at the expense of the quality of our output. So, we need to be mindful of that too. So the relationship between the size of the context window, along with the processing capability, the high-end thought process capability, and very often the higher up you go, the more context window you go. But the more important it is, and I think you mentioned this, Bally, to set the context with higher levels of specificity. If you're using Opus, don't use a one sentence prompt. You really need to set the context because it's a thinking mechanism. So if you're imprecise in your prompting and your approach, it's going to spend that much more time and chew up that many more tokens and probably come out with an output that you're going to have to iterate on many more times because you didn't be specific in the first place. So these are just some of the experiences that I've knocked my head against the wall about.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's coming back to that point of that upfront thinking and contextualizing, giving it the role, things that we've spoken about before, right? So if we can do that initially, then that is super helpful. So there is something actually that it might be worth having a look at for yourselves. I was digging around thinking, well, where do we have, let's see, I don't know if you can see this. And I don't use OpenAI's platform necessarily. But if you go into, so you can see there's only like 978 credits on there, but this is there, and this is openai.com where you've got the documentation. So to your point there, if you've got whichever model you're using, they've got these documentation you can look at. You can
Yeah.
look to see which of those, kind of they are using,
Yep.
and that helps because
And
previously we've talked about the cookbook, which kind of goes through the models, but I find this is really helpful for those of you perhaps in the OpenAI environment. It's definitely worth having a look at because then
yeah,
uh, that will help, I believe. Yeah, Phil.
and Claude has a very good array of help products as well, which are useful to read.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely worth going through the documentation and I've noticed that a lot of this information is there. So a lot of the information is
Mhm.
definitely available. It's like, which of it's relevant? How is it going to help me? That's the conversation that we end up having for sure. So,
Mhm.
so as you're considering using the tool, think of the point I just want to come back to if it didn't land that really got me thinking more about is how do we, because we, as we're saying, when it degrades in a way, we want to hand over and start a new session. The other thing you could do, and I'm also exploring this in Claude Code, and I can show you next time perhaps, is the idea of forking. So I don't know if you've tried this yourselves, anyone here. So it means that we take a conversation and we fork and when we're going through our train of thought, it's the same with the models. We're going through our train of thought and suddenly something else pops up, or we want to go in a different direction, we may fork off and go in that direction. The other thing I've also noticed, we can rewind. If suddenly it's gone off tangent, we can rewind and go back to the initial chat. And I think these capabilities are they're in Claude Code. So I'll look more into forking because I feel like that's a really helpful thing. And I'm also exploring myself, so it's definitely worth considering. Or just starting a new session, then the conversation then have comes, surfaces. Well, if I've got all these conversations, then maybe that conversation now you've had, do you need to keep that session? Well, you could get rid of it, right? Now you're continuing here because
Well,
you've done.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they used to say in projects. If you're in a project and you're doing a chat that is kind of following a sequence, like writing a book and you're using each chapter to write a book chapter, or each chat rather to write a book chapter. If the LLM goes off the rails and, to your point, produces a, a chat session that's because ultimately that chat session will impact on the rest of the chat sessions in that project. So using the term pollute, I think you mentioned. So yeah, the best thing to do is and I've done this, delete the chat and start over again. And by deleting that chat from the project, all of that negative or imprecise data or polluted material is gone. If you don't do that, it'll persist.
Yeah, it will carry. I always said it sort of lingers on, doesn't? And you're like, oh, I
Yeah,
didn't want that, and that's not the bit. The rewinding is the bit that really sort of, I use these tools, and it was only the other day I realized actually I can just go back and everything below that conversation I don't need to have
right,
that information. So by doing
right.
that,
Or copy and paste up until the point that it did work, and then ask it to create a synopsis or a summary of that and open a new chat and pick up where you left off. Yeah, those are the things you have to be mindful of.
absolutely. Yeah. So a few points for those of you. Yeah. So rewind is the other thing. When I say rewind, go back and forking off and these aren't available in the chat necessarily, but they're available in Claude Code. So how many of you are using Claude Code just out of interest? Like Richard, of course. Yeah. John, you're not as of yet.
Yeah,
Uh,
now that you mention it, I've never even thought about uh, token constrictions or on. Oh, yes, that's the thing there. Even though it's using API call, it doesn't have a console. We know that too.
I may have frozen. Is it me? Let me just hopefully can you hear
Yeah,
me?
you were frozen for a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
just
mind
a second.
do you mind repeating that, Richard? Apologies. Yeah. It might be the heat that's slowing me down here.
Uh, okay, so the question um, I haven't really thought about, to be honest, context windows in Claude Code. You think you're code, I guess, in the traditional sense, if you're coding in, whatever React or whatnot, that doesn't really factor in. But thanks for the reminder. In Claude Code, I guess
Let me see if it's
it
my
has a context window as well that we need to
absolutely.
be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. To be thinking of the content, absolutely. So it gets forgotten because we have the files on our desktop, right? Sometimes that might be the case, but we still need to be careful. Hopefully you can all hear me. Otherwise, let me know. Um, you can hear me? I can see Suba moving, so hopefully.
You're Nella. Uh, Bally's
That's
back.
okay, I'm here. Well, you could continue speaking, which is amazing, which is great. Tom, it's fantastic. And so I also wanted to show you a couple of other things for those of you who perhaps haven't noticed. And this, so most of us are here are using Claude. So I started doing a couple of things that I thought I'll just
Yeah.
bring to surface. So we are using it. So now this was something I started doing a few minutes ago. I thought, right, so I was building um, the skills production. So design, if you haven't seen, you can now design using Claude. It was you'd have to kind of go into Claude design to use design. It was in beta testing at the time. Now you have the capability of using design, right? So I was testing this out today and I've run out of my, talking of tokens, I've already consumed my tokens for the day. So I was like, okay, I will check this out just ahead of today's session to see. And
Yeah.
and
Des-
it's already
Design is a very hungry user of tokens. Then that, that, that sure you have to be careful of work.
abs yes. Absolutely. I think I can see Tom agreeing
Beautiful
with
though.
you. Tom's agreeing with you on that. So, and I haven't used it as much. And I thought, I didn't do our slides using it today, but I noticed that how many slides I had nine, it consumed it up. And it's great that it's now in the same interface, the
The
same.
general rule of thumb is use.
Sorry, Richard, let me see if I might move if this is.
Yeah. Oh,
Let me see.
yeah. The temptation is to use design to produce artifacts, but and it does obviously, but it's designed to create the effort and co-work or other things to create the artifacts because yeah, this design is super expensive. I mean, I did a couple hours on it and used up almost my entire month's allotment. So be careful about producing artifacts in design. It's tempting because you're right, it produces incredible output, but yeah, it's expensive. And now that it's embedded within the subscription model, previously I think it used APIs. So you had to pay the piper with API calls, but now that if it's part of the main Claude, it's under your subscription. It's still chewing up tokens behind the scenes, but a lot faster than Chat or Cowork will.
Yeah, it's yeah, so to be mindful, and I wanted to flag that up because those of you using it thinking, oh, go and design things here, it will, and I only used it for that one slide deck. I have
Yeah,
used,
I mean,
yeah,
if you're doing a killer presentation for a major $1 million client, then of course to use it,
yeah,
you know, but I
yeah.
wouldn't use it, for example, for today's presentation. First of all, your presentations are beautiful to begin with, but it's probably overkill.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. So we haven't got, it looks like Colleen's saying I've not used Claude yet. So we've got one person who hasn't used Claude. When you go on, of course, the capabilities we're talking about here, where we would get the Claude desktop app, which you can download, and that is free. So, Colleen, I know you're coming under Zoom user today, so it would be worth if to get Claude and test it out if you haven't, if it's new. And Colleen was saying she's new back, she's had a break, so she's coming back and here with us. So test out which tool. So I want to recap. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to recap some of the points we've just covered. So if I missed anything in the chat, and then I'll continue. Hopefully you can, otherwise I'll move. John, can you still hear me? Just double check. I think I might have frozen. We're struggling today. I'm not sure if it's the heat, but we're really struggling with the Wi-Fi. Before you came on, some of you before you came on,
Yeah,
just
you
how
guys are in.
yeah. I might just move during that point, and we'll see what the others.
He,
Yeah. What did you say, Richard? This should work a bit better. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, yeah. So, John, I was asking you a question. I think you may have missed it.
Yeah, it froze up on me. I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I've probably forgotten as well. No, just asking, did you have questions about this? I know there's a few of you who've been really kind of going full on with using these tools. Did you have a question about Claude?
Well, I'm exploring the possibilities of Claude and relation. And for the purposes I'm using it for is more of integrating and creating a coaching AI brain related to golf instruction. And for where I'm headed, even if it isn't right now.
Yeah, yeah. And when you've
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have questions around that, do please reach out and ask. So yeah, please do. I know you're putting quite a lot of content together. So the other thing I wanted to mention, there was something that a few of you mentioned. In fact, it might have been Richard. Richard, you were talking about, oops, not this particular area, but you were talking about open router infusion. Now, beg your pardon. I
yeah.
haven't had a chance to explore that at all. So do you want to say, I did ask a few folk, not many of us have been, well, I haven't been using it. Did you want to say something about that? I know you kind
Yeah,
of,
I'm just trying to understand what it is myself. I think the application is more on the back end. Because essentially what Open Router Fusion does is it's a hedge against, let's face it. I mean, all of us have been frustrated, in particular with Claude, because there have been numerous outages. Obviously, the pullback of one of their recent models, which was a political move, it had nothing to do with the issue with the product, because ChatGPT 5.5 is essentially the same as Hermes. Mythos. Got my Greek names confused there. But yeah, from what I understand, Open Router, what it does is it kind of mitigates the what you talked about earlier, the tendency for us to become totally dependent on one model. And I think a lot of us have moved in that direction with Claude because we're using, cowork, code, design, chat, because obviously Anthropic has done a good job in marketing its products, in all the different capabilities. While OpenAI has similar capabilities, I think they lost a lot of market share after their agreement to back the Department of War's use of its AI for surveillance of American citizens and use with unmanned drone strikes. So, I know we don't talk politics and things like that, but it should be a factor in I think in our decision making, because AI is such a black box. We don't really know what it's being used for. And if it is being used in nefarious ways, we should be mindful of that. But back to Open Router. Yeah, the concept is Open Router can use some of the cheaper models in combination. So let's say you could ask Opus a question. You could send a prompt to Opus and get a response. You could send that same prompt through Open Router, and it will basically submit that prompt to 5 less expensive models like Kimi, or Gemini 3.5 Lite, or some of the open source models. And what it will do is it'll take a composite of those 5 responses and assimilate that into a single response or output. And according to the benchmarks, it benchmarks right up there with the top primary large language models. So it's kind of a, and in that process, you could save money. But I don't think it's a practical application. You're not going to submit a prompt to it, and then when you're already using a pre-existing model for that purpose. But I think on the back end is where it can make inroads, because if you're using Code or Codex or whatever platform, it can basically apply the same kind of reasoning and rationale and come back, I guess, with code written using that same process and be less expensive than a more costly model. So I still have some more digging into it. So if you want, I can come up with some potential use cases and report back at a future date. But yeah, that's my understanding of Open Router at this point.
Yeah, it's
Is
yeah, just on that point, I started having a look, and there, I mean, there's content online, discussions about whether it does what it says on the tin. So if you haven't tried it, I wouldn't sort of advocate you go and do that.
no, yeah,
It's just out of conversation. It's I would say kind of apply some of the things we've been talking about, use case scenarios. There's always going to be other tools and open source. There's some amazing stuff coming out for sure. I
yes,
would say we can for the purpose of kind of what we're doing, for all of us, I suppose a note also to myself is there are other things. However, what's working and what's supporting our workflow, and like
right.
John was saying, creating content for those who coach in the golfing space. And so always be top of mind, what task is it, how's it's going to support my work? Because we've been in this space now for 2 years, and the more we kind of have that top of mind, we're going to make sure we're focusing in that direction. Otherwise, we can easily go, we'll be
Well,
forking off quite heavily.
I think the big impact will be if products like Open Router catch on. I mean, again, right now, the primary purpose is more on the back end. If you're using API calls, which can be very expensive, it can come up with a more cost-effective solution. But as products like Open Router hit the market, it's going to put intense pricing pressure on the major models, because they're not going to be able to compete with products like Open Router, which will, if they meet the benchmarks, I mean, that's what Kimi and some of the others out there, which is pretty remarkable when you have open source uh, models that are competing with the big players and doing pretty well from a benchmarking standpoint. Do we need to be spending all this money on the Anthropics and the OpenAIs of the world? And I think that's where this is all heading. Yeah, so it's the same thing with Linux. I mean, it had created a nice market share for people to design open source software and systems as an alternative to the Microsofts and the Oracles of the world. But I don't know that it certainly didn't put them out of business, but it did give developers and entrepreneurs a more cost-effective entry point into using the technology. So I think that's where it's probably headed.
Yeah, it's my sense as well from having those conversations recently. That's the direction I think we'll be seeing, which will, be an interesting playing field for sure, because the direction we'll be heading with open source. And although there was a lot of discussions about sort of, whether to go that route, we're seeing much more. Let me just grab something here. This is where I wanted to go. So as a recap, and for those, I think we've still got Jacqueline. So Jacqueline, good to see you. Just a quick recap: match the model to the task, the job. Don't default to one model or one vendor. So that's the thing we're saying here. I suppose most of us agree that. So think of the same. So three tiers appear in most of these. When we're thinking of these top tier AI tools, they all have these kind of high thinking, and you've got documentation. I can share that link with you. The effort is depth, not brains, and not truth. You can't dial a weaker model up for stronger one. And I think those are the discussions that are being had at the moment. A lot of people are saying that yes, you can, and we've got to experiment. The raw highest model that counts at sensible effort, workhorse for everyday flagship when your name's on it. So think about those. Pick the model, not the leaderboard, and check high effort, work for confident but wrong answers. Action, pick one reoccurring. So for those, and Colleen, yeah, you're going to be, you're not using Claude. Pick one task, check it out and see, is it matching on its purpose and report back to us. So next bi-weekly, excited to say, is on the 8th of July. Wow, July. That's incredible. And that will be 11 a.m., 4 p.m. UK time. So thank you all for your interest and continuously being here. Keep up the great work. Appreciate you. And as always, feel free to reach out. You can DM me. And I hope you found today useful as you're testing out the tools. Suba, did you have another last comment? Did you have a question?
Yeah, that's it. I clearly about it. I need to mention few of the uh, I need to test around the use cases regarding, as mentioned, the cloud code. And as well, first time I'm hearing about the Richard says open router fusion. I'm very curious about it. I want to dig deeper into it. What is in that?
Okay, yes, yeah. So,
Yeah.
just on a side note, Suba is a developer, so that curiosity is always, you're gonna want to go into kind of, that space. Oh, you're welcome, Tom. Great to see you all. See you all in 2 weeks' time. Continue working with these models, and we know that they do work. And we want to steer the models and not be steered by them. All right, so see you the week after next. And remember, please DM me and continue. If you're having great weather, enjoy. And I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye
for
bye
now.
then.
Bye now.